Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Powerless Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Renee Christine, who is a singer-songwriter out of Pennsylvania. We chat about Renee's start in music, how she's classically trained, what got her to pick the cello back up after numerous years of not using it, kind of going through college, where some of her more original music came from. We break down her song Turtle Island that you'll be hearing in full at the end of this episode, as well as her newest song called The Bomb. We talked about that a bit before it actually came out, but it came out this past week. Absolutely fantastic songs that dive into a lot of things from environmentalism and climate change to war and war profiteering and warmongering, foreign policy, as well as domestic policy as it relates to indigenous populations. We talk a lot about Renee's influence and how a lot of it comes not from music and comes from things like literature that she reads. We go over some of her favorite, most recent literary works that she read through that influenced some of her music and just kind of influenced her worldview. We talk a lot about staying away from sort of the clickbaity nonsense that comes with day-to-day politics and news, which I know I talk about that stuff on the show, so it was kind of interesting to get her perspective on that as well, and everything in between. I was really happy to have Renee on. She's absolutely fantastic to kind of break these things down and talk about her worldview and her perspectives, as well as what influences her music. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the episode. If you want to get in touch with me, or if you want to follow the podcast, see the clips that we put out and everything in between, as well as written pieces, you can follow at thepowerlesspod.com or go to at thepowerlesspod on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, things of that nature. You can go to Substack, same handle, to find some of the written pieces, find some of the pieces at the main website when it comes to the pieces I put out for the New Metal Agenda and things of that nature as well. All of that will be at thepowerlesspod.com. You can also support the podcast for as little as $2.50 a month on Patreon. You can buy merch like what you see in the back with the logo on it, on cups, on hoodies, on t-shirts, and everything in between. We've had some people buy those things more recently, and that is really, really nice because it does help out and go a long way of making sure I'm able to do everything here and take the time to make these episodes the best they can be. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Here is the episode with Renee Christine, singer-songwriter out of Pennsylvania on the Powerless Podcast. Thanks so much.
Sitting on my doorstep, have you heard the news? No, I mean, did you hear the news when it went up in flames? It's the small men with the big heads who choke the life from the best of them, but they had to burn the rules to win the game.
All right, here with Renee Christine, who is an artist out of Pennsylvania, if I remember right from reading your bios, who's put out recently a song, Turtle Island. Obviously, you've put out a few other songs, and you've done a lot of clips of your own songwriting, and you kind of describe what a lot of your songs are about a lot whenever you post things on social media, which is where I found you from when you first started posting little snippets of what became Turtle Island that you released just a couple weeks ago. So absolutely happy to have you on. First of all, just how are you doing today, and how are things going?
I'm good. Yeah, things are going pretty good. How are you? Where remind me where you are?
I am from, I always tell people Chicago area. It's not really true. It's like northwest of Chicago, but Illinois.
Gotcha. I was wondering what the tornadoes.
Yeah. That comes with the territory. Yeah. You have no idea. Like, I'll book these things around this time of year, and I'm like, I should preface with people that depending upon the week, I might be down here where I'm at to record these, but the lights will be off and I'm hearing sirens. So I appreciate you rescheduling with me and doing all that. You just know how it goes.
Yeah, can't control that. Yeah.
No, not quite. Yeah. So again, happy to have you on. I thought what we'd do today is kind of break down where music first became a big part of your life when you started recording music. Obviously, I think for you, I've had on artists all over the place from, like indie singer-songwriters to pop artists to metal bands and everything in between. I haven't had on too many cello players. This might be the first foray into that. So it'd be interesting to talk about all that. And then what I thought would be cool, we could specifically talk about, of course, your latest song that I think has made waves in a lot of cool ways, at least on social media, which is Turtle Island, but also just your music in general. I think what's interesting is kind of how you craft the lyrics and what the influences are that you shared on social media, and kind of giving people the background there too. So after all of my spiel there, what I like to do to kind of do a little bit of an icebreaker with people is to just ask you kind of what have you been listening to a lot lately? What's kind of your Spotify on repeat, or the equivalent of? Is there artists you want to shout out, whether it's everything from the Beatles to a local band, whatever the case may be? What have you been listening to a lot lately?
Yeah. So I'm kind of weird in this regard, in that it's actually fairly rare that I listen to music.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was really weird. Yeah. But I am a really big Sammy Ray and the Friends fan.
Okay.
Massive fan. I was at a concert of theirs. I forget. It must have been a month ago or something. Yeah, and just phenomenal to see live. So they're pretty much always on repeat. Yeah, but kind of grew up on like a lot of Fleetwood Mac and the usual culprits: Neil Young, who else? John Gorka, Judy Collins. Like the
The classics, right?
the
Yeah, yeah,
classic crowd, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
There's a
mean,
lot too. Yeah.
a Fleetwood Mac, especially is one that I think just about everybody throws out there. Whether, like I said, whether I talk to like somebody that's in some heavy metal band or someone that's doing like acoustic guitar, like solo music, it's like, yes, Fleetwood Mac has influenced something that you play in some regard for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because you say that you say you don't listen to music a lot. There's some people I talk to that have said similar things that are like prolific songwriters, which I find a little interesting. Why do you say? Do you just like spend time more reading or doing other things, or what's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, well, it's comforting that you say that, because I feel like I don't find people who say that, and I feel like such a weirdo. But yeah, and I can't really put my finger on why exactly it is. I think, yeah, like I'm doing other stuff. I think I'm not into like a lot of the time, being other than, how am I saying this? I think I kind of like to be present where I am a lot of the time. I don't know. It's weird. It is. I have a hard time describing why. why.
So you're saying you practice mindfulness instead of having background music at all times. Is that
Or
kind of
like,
what you're saying? Yeah.
maybe, yeah. Like my mind is such an ADHD crowded place that like maybe I just don't need anything else to entertain myself. It's just like 18 trains
I
of thought in there at all times.
My brain is a similar fashion, but in the opposite direction, where I have to have 10,000 things going on in the background at all times, or
Yeah.
my brain can't do anything. So yeah, yeah, everybody's different, but it's just kind of a interesting thing that some people will say that I'll talk to. They're like, "Oh yeah, I write music, but I don't remember the last time I listened to an album." It's like, all right, well,
Yeah.
to each their own. It works out clearly for you. So yeah, thanks for going over that. Again, to kind of kick things off before we dive into the music that you've released or that you've been, putting clips out and things like that of, when did music, you referenced some things you listened to, growing up, like Fleetwood Mac and all these different things, Neil Young. When did music first become like a really big, thing for you? What kind of brought you to a place where you started not just kind of passively listening to what your parents maybe threw on, but it became sort of part of your identity all on your own?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, it was like probably sometime in my preteens, and you're like, yeah, like maximum angst, attempting to attempting to kind of develop your own tastes. I was, I think, 12 when I sort of started making the transition from like, I wrote a ton of poetry as a kid, just like had all these composition books filled with poetry, to like starting to write songs more. And I was like too intimidated by the guitar, because it was just like big and scary. So I got a ukulele and I started kind of writing stuff on that. And then I was like, well, I can't really do like a ton on this, or I just like wanted a little bit more of like tone. And so my mom always had this guitar sitting around in the house that her parents got for her when she was 13. And when I was 13 or so, she gave it to me. She was like, I'm not really going to play it anymore. Do you want it? And I was like, okay. So I kind of picked it up from there. And I've been playing the cello since I was like 9. But I never like did any songwriting on it until like this past year. It's kind of a strange thing that I've stumbled onto. But yeah, it's kind of the
Yeah,
spark.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's my problem. But yeah, like, to the cello thing, like, it is interesting. I know people that have played, like I was in a band with a guy that played upright bass. I've known people that played violin, or were an orchestra, whatever the case may be, or myself, even with like woodwind instruments. A lot of us like will learn these kind of things, and then when it comes to your own, kind of current music you're writing, you just kind of throw it out the window. And like, that doesn't make any sense when you think about it, right? You spend all this time learning an instrument, especially cello is such a, it's such a dynamic instrument. There's a lot of range to it, similar to guitar in a lot of ways, where you can still, despite it being, you can hit some pretty low notes with it, like go really up the scale and be very versatile with what kind of your ranges with what you're playing. That's interesting that, you've been playing since you were 9, and then you, for the first time really this past year, when you started posting these clips that I, found you from, that's when you're like, oh, I could actually create something with this. Is that, were you just more doing like, were you doing classical stuff like being in an orchestra, or kind of classically trained stuff, or where did that kind of come from for you?
Yeah, and I think this is like pretty common across school districts as far as I'm aware, that like they like have you start an instrument like fourth grade ish. And it was funny because I like almost chose the clarinet. I don't know how that would have turned out. But my mom really liked the cello, and I was like, well, if mom likes it, it must be good. So basically, I like, yeah, started taking the cello, was like a big orchestra nerd, yeah, all the way through high school. And then I think I was just like, end of high school, I was just like burnt out on it. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to go to music school. I think I just like, I like other stuff. And so I was like, I don't think I want to hate music because everything I'd heard about music school sounded really intimidating. So I was like, I'll just go to regular school, I guess. And not, yeah. And so I just couldn't fit orchestra and stuff into my schedule in college. I was just too darn busy. And so I basically put it down from the time I was 18 to like the time I graduated college. So I like feel pretty rusty right now, but I never had social media or anything like that really until after I graduated college. Just like personal choice.
Probably good choice.
I think it ended up being a good choice. I mean, like I definitely spent most of my life just like perpetually out of the loop. It's like my friends and family have felt obligated to like update me on like the latest memes. It's always their joke. They're like, "Cool, we've brought you into the year 2012. Let's keep going." Yeah, no, like I never had an Instagram until I started a business out of college, and I was like, oh, I guess I should like do the marketing thing. And then, long story short, I like got Lyme disease and had to shut that down because I just like couldn't keep up with the work. And kind of at the encouragement of a good friend of mine, like started some music social media and just started like playing open mics and putting up stuff. And eventually it started to take off. Took a little while, but yeah, much to my amazement.
Well, for someone that has not really used much social media in your life, you sure have done a pretty good job of marketing, I think, over the last several months, to say the least.
I appreciate that.
Uh it's no, it is interesting, you say, because I think that's a pretty rare thing. I know a few I could probably name off of like one hand the amount of people I know that like took that route with like social media and stuff in college, or our relative age range, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think that would do a lot of good things for for people, including myself. Like probably would have been pretty great to stay off of that and like focus on studies, or like go outside and go in nature a little more and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think looking back on it, especially like recognizing the impact that it has on me currently, like I'm glad that I just like mostly grew up without it. But it was like a strange thing, especially like in my teen years. Like it was almost kind of difficult to like make new friends because if you like didn't have a Snapchat, people would just not want to talk to you. So it's like it made me really mad at the time. But yeah, it's kind of a weird catch.
Well, that would kind of get into a little bit of, I guess, like where you're, a lot of your music, what you've posted, what you've written about, whether it's like one of the songs you've released or some other clips you've put out, or whatever the case may be. A lot of the music you put out, I would say, or that you've shown is, I would say, singer songwriter, indie. I don't know exactly how to put genres on things, but like you're very, it's full of social commentary, right? It's full of like, whether it's historical or climate change, war, whatever the case may be. And it's just a little interesting tidbit that you say like you kind of stayed off social media for a long time, because I think for a lot of people to kind of get out of the conventional, I'm going to talk about whoever's running for office now, or we're going to talk about the Democrats and Republicans, or we're going to talk about kind of like the horse race bullshit that is inundated every couple of years. It's through learning about something through social media. It'd be whether finding like an independent journalist or finding some scholar. Like that's how I found a lot of the authors that I read about this kind of thing with over the years, was through finding clips of their interviews on social media or something. So where did that kind of come from for you? Because as someone that was kind of more or less during your formative college years untapped into that aspect that would get you maybe some of that information, you certainly are still very tapped into these topics. So where does that kind of element of things come from for you?
Yeah, also very weird and roundabout. Yeah, so like and this is really new too for me to be like writing about social justice and those sorts of issues is like really new in the like broad kind of history of my songwriting. And so is like writing loud yelly things. It's like really new too. Um, I think where did it? I think at least some of it came from like I made this like sort of semi-conscious decision like around the end of college for me a couple of years ago to like be a person who reads a lot of books. And like I was like a huge reader as a kid, and then school kind of like beat the joy out of me. And so I just like didn't touch a book from the time I was like 13 to the time I was like 21 or 22. And then just kind of like got back into it and I was like trying to figure out what I like to read and stuff. And I've been like steadily I'm like looking at this like 8-inch high stack of books over here. Yeah, I just kind of decided to like fill myself in on all of the classics that I feel like I missed, that I just like didn't read. And a lot of it, yeah, I think a lot of the inspiration this year for stuff has been coming from books. Yeah.
Are there a few like authors that you really like kind of would read from? Or I'm just kind of, I'm always interested in stuff. I'm reading these kind of things probably too often. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and like yeah, like books that like I'll cart around places and people will be like, "Are you reading that for fun?" Like I just finished a few weeks ago Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which is a slightly more modern one, and that really blew my mind. I've read The Art of War. I've read the Tao Te Ching. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius live in my backpack. Got a bunch of others. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene I read a year or two ago, and it's like one of those books that I never truly put down because it's really fascinating to me. And I think like yeah, power in general has been like a thing that I feel like I've studied this year, sort of. I've been sort of chewing slowly through this is a funny one. The Spirit of Law by Montesquieu. So it's this two volume. I'm crazy for yeah. But I got it in French, in the original French, and it inspired I think I picked it up because it was one of the books that inspired the framers of the Constitution. Um and I think like the current events have in part also inspired like the books that I'm reading. Like the moment I like figured out Donald Trump got elected, I like the first thing I did was like go on to thrift books. It's like I don't know if I'm gonna be able to read these much longer, so I better get them now. So like in December, I like stocked the hell up.
Good idea, to be honest. You know,
Yeah, yeah, and like it's like I feel like I keep taking detours and finding new things. Like I've got Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde here. I just finished Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther King, which was phenomenal. Rest is Resistance by Trisha Hersey. Just like the list goes on and on. And yeah, I think like you are what you read, in so many instances. And I think it feels like a balm to social media to me in a way because social media is so like surface level and bite sized and like such a menace to critical thinking and all of the things I hold dear, kind of engaging with life on a deeper level. And so, yeah, I feel like I muddled through that. Maybe, hopefully, that answers sort of
it
semi.
does. No, it does. And what I like about this is a lot of times when I do this podcast, I'll have like a few people like give me a few bands to check out, at the beginning or something. You've given several books I got to check out, which I actually prefer. So that's great. Yeah, we've got a whole. I'll try to when I go edit this, I'll try to put all those books in like a little list at the bottom for people to
Yeah,
check out as well because I think that's important. I think what you said too. That's why like for as much as like I think most of the time the only reason you might relate, the only reason I often use social media is to promote this or to promote my own music that I make, right? And like half of it feels like such a dredge to do. Like you want it to go out there for people to find it because you want people to find the music and you like interacting on that level. But just the sort of thing of like being, talking about social commentary or being politically engaged or whatever that is, like it's not only about people having terrible beliefs, it's also about people maybe even agreeing with you but not really knowing what they're talking about because they've only read headlines of a few articles that they skim through on like as they doom scroll on their phone all day.
yeah,
And there is that element between that and like now I'm getting on my soapbox here, but between that and AI, like the whole like media literacy and critical thinking is just so out the window that like yeah, it's good to pull from deep reading and deep understanding of things rather than like reacting to things and just having sort of a reactive lens to things, even if you end up with sort of the nominally correct opinion, if you don't have things to back it up and don't understand the framework where things come from, like how can you really to a certain extent understand why things are happening or understand your opinions, right? Like it's a big detriment, I think, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It has been like a radically amazing change to my life and how I understand the world. And it's like even if you're not like I don't actually keep all that much up on current events. Reading the news is super depressing because it's super profitable for it to be super depressing.
Mm-hmm.
But having like a deeper understanding of like the historical context of everything is like helps is very helpful in understanding what's going on from a broader perspective. So it's been yeah been good.
Well, and that kind of leads a little bit into your music, which, we could start off obviously with the song that you released just a few weeks ago, Turtle Island, which, yeah, you put out, and yeah, May 23rd. Already, at least, I'm one of those people, when I say this, of course, like numbers aren't everything, but to see that it has over 400,000 plays on Spotify alone since, and it's been literally like a month and 2 days is no little feat for somebody, right? So I guess like to start off here, Turtle Island for a lot of people, you could give the name for that people that don't know. Obviously, like this is a term related oftentimes to my understanding, at least to initial indigenous populations. What they discuss is like North America, for lack of a better term. You'll get this better than I will, but kind of speak to where the song's topic came from, even the title if you want to, and just kind of break down where the influences were for it.
Yeah, and I think I'm really cautious in sort of breaking this down because I don't have native heritage. And so like I feel like I would like to be really cautious here. But yeah, and I read actually I think this is the book next to me. It was this book from Barnes and Noble and I don't necessarily recommend it, but it's called Native American Myths and Legends. And so it's a collection of stories from around the continent from different Native American nations. And when I put this clip on social media, the caption was usually something like, inspired by Native American folktales. And when I say that, I sort of mean like I didn't go super deep into referencing a ton of specific stories in the song because the way that we sort of define something like religion, for example, is in America is very like Eurocentric and doesn't necessarily apply super well to the way that indigenous traditions are, and that's been like super misunderstood and abused throughout history. And so I don't like these stories are like, even to call them myths and legends is like maybe not great, because like these are like real, these are like sacred stories to like real living breathing people. And I think for me to kind of attempt to like do any retelling of them is like you know I think is errs dangerously into like participating in cultural genocide, whether that's like subtle or overt. So when I say I was inspired, I think like the reading a lot of these stories kind of was the spark for the song. But I have read a number of books about just like the things that native cultures have like suffered over the ages at the hands of colonialism. There's this book I read called Snowshoe Country by Thomas Wickman, and it's a pretty dense history book. Um, but it goes into specifically kind of the clashes between the Abenaki people in kind of what we would call New England sort of area and the white settlers there, and the way that for I think it was a couple hundred years, it was during the Little Ice Age, like in the sometime in like I think it was the 1600s. um Native American peoples were able to evade a lot of kind of settler violence and being persecuted during the winter months, specifically because they had snowshoes and were able to travel to like their winter grounds. And white settlers were like able to were really slow to adopt snowshoes, and so they just like couldn't follow them, which I find like so cool.
Yeah.
And there's like references to that. There's like just references more to like the historical like hurts that have been suffered by various cultures all over the place. But yeah, there's just a lot of it's kind of like they're peppered in there from all sorts of different kind of sources and thoughts. Yeah, it's such a difficult thing to kind of take.
Absolutely. I think this song, this is like that was like what like first kind of pulled me into it was as much as I really enjoy the cello playing and your vocals, especially when you belt it out in the chorus and everything like that. It's fantastic. But it was kind of this delivery in a way that you do a good job of talking about, I think. And again, like you said, it's a difficult thing to kind of navigate as to to white people discussing this topic, right? I'm also cognizant of that when I talk about a number of other issues. It's like maybe it's okay sometimes if I shut the fuck up, but you don't only. I think another trap that this song is obviously about everything from you could mention this, but you kind of just did a little bit. I interpret it a lot of times as both obviously, like you said, settler colonial violence as well as climate change and kind of the differing viewpoints there between how colonialists or even modern Western entities view something like climate change versus, indigenous populations. And you could even talk about like the difference between like say like Western environmentalism and how indigenous populations would view this topic too, and the differences there. But what I like about it is you don't just focus on the suffering, I think, which is a very, very, I think, that's where even some of the best, quote unquote best like media that's been, that either portrays indigenous populations or is influenced by them. I can think of several movies that we could throw out there. Like I think of, Killers of the Flower Moon, I think, which is one most recently that came out a few years ago that people applauded because it was a good movie, but yet it's another example of the only thing people talk about, even when they talk about indigenous populations a lot of times, is sort of this trope of suffering, 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 and not the actual identities of the population and the culture. You do a good job of like interweaving these different topics that are influenced by this, but not just making it like this dreary, like typical kind of content that comes out of that. Was that something that you just naturally did kind of with this when you're interweaving these things, or was that something you were conscious of as you were creating the song?
Yeah, I think it was at least semi-conscious. Like I kind of like sat down and like wrote half of this and then put it on the internet and was like, oh shit, and then wrote the other half of it. I think I there is the real danger, especially like as a random white person with a cello, to like to like there's kind of this cultural tendency to like just lump all Native American people together as like one monolith of people. When so I kind of referenced multiple historical events and peoples, yeah, in this song, and I hope it came across. I haven't really done like a deep dive into these lyrics anywhere, and I'd like to soon because I think there's like a lot of room for like misinterpretation and such. But yes, yeah, I think I wanted to be careful to like I'm in love with nuance as a person. I'm like against all things black and white. It's really tough to get a yes or no answer out of me for a lot of things, which is like super frustrating to anyone who's ever met me. But yeah, I think this especially extends to like my songwriting and especially these issues. And also like my rejection of like clickbait news, and like I'm very, very conscious of the fact that like the black and white, bad and good, evil or not evil is like such an illusion, and again like a profitable one. And like I have trouble with that. So yeah, there's a ton of nuance in most of my songwriting. I try and intentionally keep it that way, especially more and more these days as I take on these topics. And like my social media accounts have been like having a bit of a moment this past like week and a half, and like as the platforms have sort of grown, now all of a sudden I'm getting a lot of the critics in, whereas like I wasn't before, like the people like just being nasty because they're bored, I guess. And so I think I'm more and more careful, not that I'm going to please people by being careful either way, but I feel like that's kind of my responsibility, and like trying to take on subjects like this, I better do them justice, right? So
Yeah, and I think you do a good job of that, and that's just like the mark of regardless of what you're talking about, the mark of like a good songwriter to begin with, right? Like you could at this point, if you wanted to do like the lowest common denominator of anything, shit, people could probably do throw it into like some AI chatbot and get some lyrics that could throw out there, right? So I mean, like, yeah, nuance and digging into the topics, having the background knowledge that you have, I think that's a big key for, going back to what we were talking about earlier. If you just have surface level understanding, you're gonna put out surface level originality on your own end, influenced by it. So that makes a lot of sense. And again, like, first and foremost, I think the song is really, really good. It pulled me into someone that like listens to primarily like heavier and like aggressive music, which is a lot of it's political, a lot of it's like social commentary, but again, some of it's definitely not as nuanced as what you're talking about there as well with your own music. It was like a good, I don't know, it was a cool encapsulation of hearing music like this that kind of like, I always view music like that, what you put out, as a little bit more of like timeless in a way, especially with like this lyrical content. You could have put this song out in the 70s and the lyrical content would stay exactly the same. And the music would still, be pertinent both then and today. And I think that's something really cool about the releases that you've put out as well.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Getting into, I guess, like the musical side of it a little bit too. So you said like you got back into playing cello again, like in writing these songs like over the past year. When you put this one together, obviously it's much more full band in the studio recording than like the clips you were putting out, which is, you do things of you like in the forest playing cello and belting your chorus out and things of that nature. When it comes to the production, the recording side, did you go to a studio to do this? Was it very much like DIY? Did you do a lot of the instruments yourself? What was kind of the delivery there from, you said you put out like half of the song as a clip, and then you end up having this full song. What was the trajectory there, I guess?
Yeah, well, yeah, so I went up to New York City to record this. Yeah, like, after I put the song out, like, whatever quarter of the music industry was in my inbox, as it so happens these days. Yeah, like, ended up going and getting this recorded. But there's, yeah, like a lot of it. I'm trying to think what was in there. Like, yeah, all the cello layers were, of course, did a lot of vocal layers. I did some guitar that mostly, yeah, like mostly got covered up, which is good because I'm not like much of a guitar player. Yeah. But a lot of it, yeah, a lot of it is like, it's just a lot of layers of stuff. And then, we put a violinist on it, which I think really added to it. But it's like, I think people, and also myself included, like struggle to know how to classify this genre wise. People have started calling it, oh, was it like folk punk or whatever? And I was like, I didn't know
Okay.
that. Is that a thing?
That is a thing. Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't have thought of that. I wouldn't have thought of that with the music, but it makes sense. I think if
I
that's
don't know.
that's when you've made a good song though, is like just when people like it and no one knows what the fuck to call it, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's it's like it's my song. That's what it is. I made
yeah.
it.
It's
That's
it's
the
a thing I made.
That's cool. It's cool that you got to kind of go up to New York and record this and kind of flesh it out and still find a way to make it sound very raw, despite obviously doing the production magic on it, doing layers and all the good stuff.
Yeah.
A little bit, you mentioned obviously your social media stuff has gotten a little bit bigger. You get a lot more eyes on this song across various platforms. What has the reaction been overall to the song? Have you seen a lot of people sort of just enjoying it? Have you gotten what's the sense been from both when you first started putting out the clips to it and also when you released the track?
Yeah. Overwhelmingly positive. It was, especially when it came out, it was like, it was so funny because it was slow to kind of like, it was relatively like slow to get going. And like, I would like continue putting out clips of it, and I would, in the caption, I would say it's out. And then I guess it like, this was like totally like a demonstration to me that like people often don't read, because in the comments they'd be like, tell me when it's out. I'd be like, dude. So I just started having to like put it in front of people's faces, like on the screen, which is just like cracking me up. After that, people are like, oh, it is out. um but yeah, it's been largely positive. Obviously there's criticism, it's a pretty sensitive topic, but it like started to get a lot more real for me when like I've gotten a pretty good handful of like DMs now from folks who are Native American, and you know, they're like, dude, I feel really like you nailed it. I feel really seen by the song, and they'll just like give me all of their like life experiences that kind of resonate. And that's like really humbling and cool, especially as somebody like trying to hold space for like this pain that I've never experienced and like will never have to experience. So it's been pretty wild. There has like recently been some criticism of like folks being like, sounds like you're appropriating my culture for views online. I'm like, no, that's never the intention. I'm not gonna invalidate that, because who am I to tell you that like, I didn't cause you pain, like it. Yeah,
Right.
I can see that you would take it that way. And yeah, I'm not the person to tell you that that's wrong, but it has been overwhelmingly positive, which is really cool, especially with a topic like this. But yeah, it's been really interesting.
I can only imagine, right? And I could see all angles of that, of it, being both a great song and people having various perspectives on appropriation or whatever else. But like, I think it's, yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And it's cool to see that it's gotten a little bit of limelight, and hopefully that like goes forward with other releases that you're going to be doing in the future. It did get me to check out the other two songs, at least that you have on Spotify as well, that I actually really enjoyed. Are you cringing a little bit there? You're not as big of a fan of those, or
Well,
what?
yeah, it's like it's always the thing where like you're proud when you put it out, and then like 6 months later, you're like, God, who am I? Who am I to put anything out there? Yeah, no, I mean, and Most Dangerous Game, especially, I'm like really proud of those lyrics still for sure. I would still like to put out maybe an acoustic version at some point, just like sans the synths, and stuff like that. So yeah, those are out there for sure.
Well, with Most Dangerous Game, that's what I was digging into the lyrics a little bit yesterday when I was kind of going back, and I like to always like dive deep into the songs as best I can before I have people on it if I have the time, right? And yeah, this one I was interested to kind of hear your backstory on it and kind of your interpretation, or your breakdown of the inspirations for it and stuff. So for people that maybe haven't checked this one out, Most Dangerous Game, you put out just December of this past year. It's still a relatively new song. What's the background with it? What's the inspiration? Just kind of break it down for me.
Yeah, I put out like one or two videos on this, but I've mostly I like didn't do a ton of like, advertising of the song because I just like didn't know how. I guess I don't know. Once it was out, I was like, cool, it's out, and then I like didn't think that like I should keep advertising. Yeah, so Most Dangerous Game was inspired by the short story, basically of the same name. It's called The Most Dangerous Game. It's by Richard Connell. It was written about 100 years ago now. And it's one of those short stories that like I read this in 8th grade English class and was like totally mortified because it's like kind of morbid and like super racist and like it's like yeah, short stories are often like really weirdly grotesque, I feel like.
Mhm.
But I like remembered this story and I like went and like searched it up online. I mean, you can find it pretty easily with yeah. So I like reread it and I wrote this song. Um And yeah, it is kind of this. I'm sort of comparing, our current events, political leadership to like, the kind of the villain in this story who lives in this house on a hill. And I'm not gonna like summarize the whole thing, but like, the protagonist, the General Sparknose, is like the protagonist falls off a yacht in the middle of the night. He's like a big game hunter. He ends up on this island that is called Ship Trap Island, um, which is pretty funny. And meets this guy on the hill. The guy on the hill is super evil. He's a big game hunter who says that he is tired of he's gotten bored of hunting regular big game. He feels like he doesn't have a challenge anymore. So basically, long story short, he hunts humans. Anybody who like ends up on his island, they are to be hunted. And so it's kind of this it's kind of this spinning of that, kind of this blending of like that story with who we've got right now. And so it was one of the first like overtly very political songs that I wrote, so it kind of holds a special place for me there. But
Yeah, and I figured as much. Of course, like listening through the song, looking at the lyrics, and knowing the title, and also reading that book probably, or short story, I should say, in 8th grade, and not only reading that, but having countless, whether it's TV shows or movies or whatever else, reference it or parody it or do spoofs, whatever. It's a pretty iconic story. And yeah, I kind of forgot because I went back and looked at it a little bit after listening through it, and I was like, I did kind of forget how kind of
it's
this is
like
like
pretty
the.
morbid.
Yeah, the original story also does not like age well with like like, but
Nope.
the premise of it is iconic, right? And it's kind of like for me, like I'm a big horror fan, and I love a lot of cosmic horror and H.P. Lovecraft, but boy, there's some of those you don't want to dive into on
Yeah.
for obvious reasons from that author in the same vein. And yeah, it's cool that you're able to take this story and kind of reference it that way because you take literature, which you're a big fan of, and you have at the forefront even on your social media, and also combine it with current events. So yeah, that's really good. I highly recommend people check that one out. I'm just curious going forward with your music. You know, you've put out Most Dangerous Game. You've put out obviously most recently Turtle Island. Going forward, are you someone that like actively writes new music, or are there things and topics that you're trying to tackle? Are we going to see new music from you coming forward in the near-ish future, or like what's kind of what's kind of going forward for you when it comes to your music, other than obviously promoting the songs you've already released, which are great.
Yeah, the top FAQ. Yeah, for me right now. Yeah, I have more stuff coming out this year, and then like this most recent song that's kind of taken off. I'm gonna call it the bomb. I think we'll be going up to make that happen shortly. I actually still have to finish writing it. Like I have like maybe 2/3 of it done, so that'll be coming out, and that was super funny because like I like have all this other stuff that I'm kind of working on releasing here pretty soon over the summer and fall, and this kind of like took off, and we're like, well, I guess we're doing this one, or like right the hell now. And so I had to like kind of rejudge everything. But yeah, like having a ton of fun doing cover art and stuff. But yeah, there will be stuff coming out. I always am kind of like making notes of topics, and when they sort of come to me, I've got this like I call it like my evil green notebook, like my like diabolical little green notebook that like lives in my fanny pack that kind of hangs around with me. And it's just like this stream of consciousness brain dump of like anything, anything and everything from grocery lists to write about war, like that sort of thing. So I'm always kind of making note of stuff that is intriguing to me. Yeah, and oftentimes it'll be like these days I'll get a lot of like single lines that just kind of like pop out of the butt crack of my brain and like end up in that notebook. And even if they're ridiculous and make zero sense, like I make a point of writing them down because like they often find a context later. So yeah, doing a lot of that sort of stuff right now. There's stuff that's just kind of like popping out left and right. Yeah, always right.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's what I tend to hear. I think from songwriters, there is no like off season, I guess, so to speak. Right? You're always coming up with something. I didn't want to ask you about the latest clips because I'll probably for the intro, I'll probably throw one of the clips that you've put up of this new song that you're calling right now the bomb. Obviously, if you look at some of the text you put out there and stuff like that, and the bomb is pretty indicative of what like a lot of the clips you've been posting are about. But just for listeners, maybe they hear this when that drops, a couple, whenever this comes out later and all that kind of stuff. What was kind of the inspiration for that one? I'm guessing it's potential World War III, but you can tell me where I'm wrong on that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like it started with like it was like before we dropped the bombs recently. I like that first like couple of lines of that chorus, like again, just like I was taking a walk or something, and they just kind of like popped out of the butt crack in my brain, and I wrote them down. And I was like, oh, this is catchy, like kind of. Sometimes they appear with the music, and sometimes they don't. But this was like I was like, oh yeah, like catchy little bossa nova sort of thing, and yeah, and so when I like put it on the internet and it like kind of had a thing. A lot of times with these when I have like pieces, I have to like sit down and stare at a wall and like ask myself what I'm actually trying to say and like what the song is about, cuz sometimes I'll have like a disembodied verse or whatever like floating around, and then like I'll more intentionally like create a context around it. And so for this one I did like I had to like sit down and like stare at the wall and like ask myself like what is this going to be about beyond just like whether we, no matter what the future holds, what do I have to say? And I'm a person who is anti-violence, anti-war, just like on principle. I've been for a long time, and so I'm kind of with the rest of the lyrics, I'm kind of diving into like criticism of like, yeah, criticism of war and of violence and of, fascist governments, and doing some reference to like things I've read, about kind of World War II era happenings, and like kind of referencing like the Reichstag fire, and yeah, there's this great book I read like a couple of years back now called The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson, which is really popular. I think it was on the New York Times bestseller. But that's a really good book, and just kind of referencing stuff like that, and kind of critiquing, yeah, critiquing all of the above.
And unfortunately for us, it's a song that will undoubtedly be timeless, no matter what year we're in, what administration we're in, or what political party, even oftentimes is in office to varying degrees. So it'll unfortunately be another timeless one, I guess, is what I'm saying. So yeah.
And I try, especially being on social media now, to keep it that way, because it's like it's so easy to write something that's like has a shelf life of like 7 days, and then like we forget about it and move on. And like I think I wouldn't want to hit, I wouldn't want to hit success for that sort of reason, just personally, and I'm not like throwing stones at anybody, but I think I want the things that I write to like have a much longer shelf life. And so I'm, pretty careful about making sure that it's not just about like the latest shenanigan that's appeared in the news, but like, what else can we dig for?
Yeah, and I think it comes from a place too where obviously it can be influenced by current events, and yet like we've been talking about this whole time, having the historical background within the music, because you have the historical background through self-education essentially with literature. I mean, that is what kind of like, I don't know, it's something I go back to. There was I forget, there's one of my favorite lyricists is from a metalcore band called The Devil Wears Prada, and the singer said that for every song he writes, he reads like 1,000 pages, or does like 1,000, like 1,000 hours of homework for background or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And especially for a band named after a book itself, and so I always think about that whenever like I'm, I do a lot of like music where sometimes I can get pulled into doing like a song about like the current shittiest thing that's happening in the world of that day. And it's like, but it's always important to take things in context, as if you're doing things in a vacuum, you're not really understanding how you got there, right? It's kind of like, not to like talk about, but like it's kind of like when people talk about, oh, Trump this, Trump that right now. It's like, yeah, but like that didn't just pop out of nowhere. And he's not the only person stoked about this and agreeing with this ideology. It comes from a place, and you can see that in books that have been written for decades, right? So yeah, I guess the crux of this interview is for everybody is read books. Renee, thanks so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate your time. We'll of course be stoked to check out these songs that you'll be putting out in the future. I'm happy to hear that there will be more this year for sure, which is something to look forward to. And then I always play a song at the end. I'm guessing I always have the guest pick it. I'm guessing you'll say Turtle Island, but I always let the guest choose.
Yeah,
but
Turtle Island would be great.
So,
yeah, got a bunch of stuff coming out this year, as I said, and then on TikTok and Instagram, I'm at Renee Christine Music on both of those. So that's where you can find me screaming with the cello. Yeah,
and it's absolutely fantastic. It's a good. We're gonna play Turtle Island, the latest release from Renee Christine on the Powerless Podcast. Thanks so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Loud was the river when the river could talk, and heavy was the water when the water could walk. Mother remembers what her sons forgot, and never take without giving. Somewhere inside you remember the tune, at the very first dawn you were singing it too. Now the fields grow brittle for the harvest moon, this time she won't be forgiving. Storms come wailing to the prisoner east, and the gods come flying from the burning tree.